Hi, my name is Rabbi Orlofsky, and welcome to, once again, the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Brought to you each week through the magic of technology, which allows me to come into wherever you are. And not saying that then we're able to watch you through your smart device, but who knows? And it's amazing where these things go. I just got an email from someone in South America who says he really can't get to Torah Shiurim and he listens to this. I'm so sorry for you. But if this is what you got, well, then let's make the best of it. That's it. And this is a little out of, we're a little out of order here. This is episode 11, and it's going to be Parshas Vayechi, but we're recording a little earlier. But I'm going to be this Shabbos in the Agudah of Madison by Rabbi Orlofsky. And I remember Rabbi Orlofsky, he had a fellow who had not yet converted, who was coming to his Navi Shir. So he says, why are you coming to the Navi Shir? You know, so he says, well, because I haven't converted yet, and I'm only allowed to learn Torah B'chsav. So he says, but we also talk about other things, Torah Sheba'al Peh. He says, that's your problem. That's not my problem. So if you're looking at this because you want a really intense half an hour of Torah content, you got to go checking and Torah Anytime for a bunch of other people who have a lot more content than I do, but mine is for sure more fun. And whether you're watching on TorahAnytime.com or YouTube or iTunes or anywhere that you listen to podcasts, we're happy to have you if you're listening, if you are watching. So however you happen to be seeing this and enjoying this, thank you for listening, thank you for watching, and thank you for the tremendous support that you have shown for this program. There's a rhythm I have always felt to Sefer Bereshis. We start Parshas Noach, Lech Lecha, Bereshis. All of those first parashiyos are really at the beginning of the autumn. We finished with all the Yom Narayim, we finished with Sukkot, we finished with Simchas Torah, we finished with all of our celebrations, and now it's autumn. And when I see those first parashiyos, I always feel it's autumnal. You can sort of feel it. And we start to move slowly from the autumn into Hanukkah, into the beginning of the winter. That whole process begins. And by the time we reach Bereshis, at the end of Sefer Bereshis, Parshas Vayechi, it's coming to an end. And we know that Sefer Shmos is already the winter. And the fact that those parashiyos come out in the winter is because it's when it's cold and when it's dark. That's gullus. That's what we do. Yeah. And so there's a feeling. There's a feeling that we're moving into it. And Sefer Bereshis, like I say, it has a certain rhythm to it. When it comes to Vayechi, we're at the end of this. And for the benefit of those of you who are listening in the Southern Hemisphere, just turn everything upside down what I just said, because it probably gets more and more hot into the winter and into the summer, and the days get longer. I have no idea. Yeah. I did speak in Australia some years ago. Took me 20 hours to get there from Eretz Yisrael. I remember I started off by saying, there's an old story about a Rav who used to give a drasha every Shabbos morning, 15 minutes, and one week he gets up and he gives it for a half an hour. Everybody was surprised. So I said, Rav, what happened? He goes, what do you mean? You spoke for a half an hour? He goes, I did? I didn't realize. I says, because I always prepare my drasha on the way to shul. I used to live 15 minutes away, and I moved. Now I'm a half an hour away, so I must have had more time to prepare. So I began by saying it took me 20 hours to get here. I have been preparing this drasha for the past 20 hours. I hope you have no place to go. But in any event, that's the rhythm. And now we finish with Sefer Bereshis. And the theme of Sefer Bereshis is clearly the end. The end. Maisa of a similar bonim. It means in Sefer Bereshis, everything that you want is in Sefer Bereshis, or as Rabbi Ari Khan coined the phrase. I assume it's his phrase, but he was very good at a turn of a phrase. He says, "Jewish history is Jewish destiny." I like that one. Yeah, it means that if we look over the history, we look through Sefer Aberration, you can find what's going to happen in the end. And in the end, Yaakov Avinu dies and is brought to Israel to be buried. Yosef HaTzadik dies and is buried in Mitzrayim. And you turn to the Haftarah and we hear about the death of David HaMelech. And so you're finding a theme here in Vayechi. There's a certain point wherein these things are coming to an end. The Ramban says, where is the Maisa of a Siman Labonim of Mashiach? And he says, because when Yaakov Avinu returns to Eretz Yisrael, he's dead. And that's what's going to be B'Yemos Mashiach. Klal Yisrael is going to be dead. So I think we're just about there. Now the Vilna Gaon says, and the famous Gemara in Gittin, where it says that Titus stuck his sword into the paroches and blood came out. So why was he zeicha to that nace? To be able to see such a thing? He said, I killed God, So the answer is because the miracle was for us, says the Gra, to teach us that we died. At the Chorban Bayis Sheni. We died. And over the past 2,000 years, our body has been rotting away until there's nothing left but dry bones. So when Mashiach comes, it's going to be a resurrection. It's going to be a Tchias HaMesim. We're going to have to come back to life. Pretty dramatic insight. The reason this is particularly poignant for me is because I would like to share a personal experience that's also a public experience. Sometimes they coalesce. I want to note the passing of Rabbi Moshe Guardsman, who was the dean of the Hebrew Academy of Nassau County for many years. Now, so that you appreciate this and put this into perspective, when Reb Moshe Shapiro Zatzal was nifter, there were gatherings to give hespedim on Reb Moshe, and I didn't attend any of them. I'll tell you the truth, I didn't attend any of them. Now, bear in mind, I had the schus to go to shiurim for Reb Moshe Shapiro for over 10 years. There are those who call me a Talmud. I don't, and neither did Reb Moshe. I want to go on record with that, There was one time when something came up, and I was trying to explain something that Reb Moshe had said, and I got into a lot of trouble with people who were not happy with Reb Moshe, and they were taking it out on me, And I said to Reb Moshe, I told them, you're angry at the king and you want to kill the jester. You know what I mean? I said, do you really think if Reb Moshe Shapiro wanted to get a message out to the world, he would choose that guy sitting in the fourth row taking notes who doesn't really follow so much what's going on? And Reb Moshe, I was hoping would say, Reb David, don't be ridiculous. You're one of my closest Talmidim. What he actually said was, in English, it's really pretty funny. Now, that was definitely not what I was hoping for, but there was a confirmation there in what I already believed. So when people were giving speeches, you have to understand that I went to Hashkafa Shiurim by Reb Moshe Shapiro. Not only that, but there was never a time in my life that I had a major life decision or crisis that I had to deal with that Reb Moshe did not make time to see me and to speak to me or to speak to my children, discuss whatever the issues were. Now, I know for a fact that there were thousands of people who considered him their Rebbe, like Rebbe Muvak, would come to him with questions, with things. And there was never a time when I told him, I have to speak to you, and I didn't use it lightly. I have to speak to you, that within 24 hours, he didn't make time for me. Having said that, and I went to the Hashkafa Shiurim, his Machshava Shiurim, There were people who only went to his shiurim and taharos. He was a tremendous Tam Chacham. After his daughter passed away, he used to give shiurim and taharos. People used to go just to his taharos shiurim. So when they had all these different hespedim, I didn't go. I didn't go because I had a personal relationship with Rabbi Moshe. There were people, like I said, who would only go to him for special things. Chanuch Tella told me that he used to speak to Rabbi Moshe only about chinuch matters. Rabbi Tella is not like me. He is very chashuv a beard because he's a very chashuv a person, And he decided once he'd go to Rabbi Moshe's Thursday night shir on the parasha, which was machshava. And Rabbi Tella is very tall, and Rabbi Moshe was not. And he sees Chanuch Tella there, and he grabs him by his beard and pulls him down and says, "What are you doing here?" And Chanuch Tella says, "I'm very sorry, it won't happen again." He says, "I spoke to him as chinuch." Yeah. He was very involved in the Baal Tshuva movement. There were Bali Tshuva who were very close to him. Yeah, and he was involved in a lot of these organizations and things. He used to go off to Europe, to Russia for Pesach to go to work with people. But I had my own relationship with him, and I didn't want my experience filtered through the lens of other people. And people had a personal experience. If I was going to hear about a gadol that I didn't have shaykhs to, you listen, you hear different people's perspective. But I had my own perspective. He was a part of my life. And that's how I remembered him. And that's how so somebody once asked me to speak about Rabbi Moshe. And I said, I can only share my own personal remembrances. I didn't do any research. I didn't look up him, where he came from. I can tell you about my experience with Rabbi Moshe over a decade. Yeah. But it was very personal. It was very personal. The Hebrew Academy of Nassau County changed the face of the world. And I'm not saying that lightly. I grew up in Long Island during a time when there was nothing there. Rabbi Meir Findel, who was a man of incredible vision, and maybe we'll talk about him another time, but he came out and he started the Hebrew Academy of Nassau County, and he brought in Rabbi Gottesman early on. By the time I came, by the time I was a student, when I started in 1964, Rabbi Gottesman was already there. And eventually, Rabbi Findel made Aliyah. He moved to Eretz Yisrael. And Rabbi Gottesman took over Hank and continued the vision. There was a study in contrasts. Rabbi Findel was a person who was kula Torah. He was kula Torah. So he learned, he spoke in Torah, that was it. Rabbi Gottesman was a person who knew how to help you enjoy not just Yiddishkeit, but life itself. He was a person who was filled with life. Now, I have to give you my own perspective. Give you my own perspective. Because there are people who, like I say, will know Rabbi Gottesman as being the Dean of Hank. They'll speak about his education, they'll speak about his impact, etc. But Rabbi Gottesman became friends of our family. When I say friends of our family, I mean that when my father passed away over 20 years ago, Rabbi Gottesman spoke at his levaya and said, "This was my yedid, yad biyad. I lost my friend today." And he meant it in absolute terms. When my father had his heart attack, he never fully recovered. And Rabbi Gottesman comes into the hospital room and he says, he says, "I had a heart attack. I recovered. Watch." And he hits the ground and he starts doing push-ups. Yeah. And he says to my father, "You'll do this too." He never did. But that was what he was. And in fact, I remember when my father had his heart attack, 80% of his heart muscle was destroyed. He was in really bad shape. And the doctors told my family, "Listen, he needs an emergency triple bypass, but he has to stabilize first, and he's not going to." he's not going to make it. So if they do the operation, he'll die on the table. So say your goodbyes. And my family was a wreck. And Rabbi Gottesman came in. And he says, who's that doctor? He's not God. He doesn't decide these things. HaKadosh Baruch Hu decides these things. He's going to have the operation. He's going to survive. I flew in from Eretz Yisrael, and I got there after the operation was over. The cardiologist was standing outside of my father's hospital room shaking his head. And I came in early in the morning. I landed. I rented a car and came straight to the hospital. I said, what's the story? He says, it's a miracle. We were sure he was going to die on the table. We couldn't find a surgeon to do the operation because the top surgeons are top surgeons because people don't die. And the reason they don't die is because they don't operate on anyone who might die. You want to be very safe. Or as Mark Twain once said, a banker is somebody who lends you his umbrella and asks for it back when it starts to rain, So top surgeons, they don't want to take a chance of operating on anybody who's in dangerous situation. Rabbi Gottesman said, I'll find somebody. And he helped the family find a doctor. And my father survived for several number of years. But he was always there. He was there at every simcha. He was there at every tragedy. He was always there. It'll be 2 years in Shvat. In another month, it'll be 2 years, a month and a half since my mother passed away. And Rabbi Gottesman was already not well. But somebody told him that my mother passed away, and they said he started crying. My father passed away, and for the next 20 years, Rabbi Gottesman used to come every week and have lunch with my mother. And she would make soup for him, and they would have soup, and they would talk, and that was my mother's whole week. She waited for Rabbi Gottesman to come. He would tell her stories about what he was involved in and what was going on. And my mother used to say, because I think he's telling me the same stories, but I don't remember them. I said, Mom, that's why you were always a great audience. He would come and he would sit with them and Rabbi Gottesman, and Mom just was our family. It was something more. It was something more than just an educator. He became a part of your life. And he wanted the kids to be happy. He wanted the kids to have fun. I never forget one time when they brought in one of those roller skating vans. I don't know if you remember these. I don't even know if they still have them. But when I went to sleepaway camp, so they would have a roller skating night. This big van would pull up with roller skates, and everybody would get roller skates, and you'd go into the gym, and you'd skate around, and that was your roller skating rink. He did this once in Hank, and he had his skates on, and he was running around just, with everybody else. I remember when we would have baseball games with other schools, he was leading the chants, he was leading the cheers. There was something that was so special, and it brings home the point that it says, the Gemara at the end of Tainus, it says that Kol tzaddik b'tzaddik will make a circle with a Kodesh Baruch Hu in the middle. Yeah, and that's going to be Mashiach. Rabbi Lev, the Rav Moshe Matasyahu, likes to say the Gemara at the end of Tainus, and if we understand this, it'll be the end of Tainus. Yeah. The tzaddikim form a circle, which means the guy who's on this side is 180 degrees away from the guy who's over here. They're on opposite sides. But there's got to be somebody who's there to, make sure that there's Seder and the people are learning and the people appreciate Torah and, the vision. Yeah. George Bush Sr. passed away recently, and I remember when he was running, he always used to say, I have a problem with the vision thing. He didn't have a vision. He was good at running things and making sure things took place and, and handling things. I didn't have a vision. There were certain people who were visionaries. And for sure, Rabbi Findel was a visionary. Rabbi Gottesman knew how to be able to take that vision and make it, something that was fun and was enjoyable and was exciting for the people who were involved. Tzadikim, af b'chayim nikru, afilu b'misasa nikru chaim. Tzadikim, even when they're dead, they're called alive because everything that they do continues on in this world. Rishayim, even when they're alive, they're called dead. Yeah, nebuch. But a person who is alive, these kind of people make contributions to the world, and they're able to. There's a powerful Gemara, that says, if you don't mourn the passing of a tzaddik, then small children die. Sounds terrible. So it says Rabbi Yisrael Salanta, why does that happen? What's the cause and effect? Because when somebody dies, it's a tragedy. Ella what? Yehol is not a tragedy. Life is hard. Life is difficult. And listen, he's in a better place, not suffering. You see this very often with older people. When older people pass away, they say, all right, listen, he lived a long life. He was sick already, it's enough. When I used to do questions and answers, so somebody would ask me, how do you explain the death of a small child? I said, inherent in that question is you have no problem with the death of an older person. So you don't mind if people die. They just have to be at an age that you're comfortable with. How old? 60? It's okay if they go at 60. 80? Yeah. I imagine the 80-year-old might be, less inclined to go, even though you're okay with it. And you could tap them on the shoulder and say, listen, philosophically, I'm okay if you die tomorrow. I just want you to know that. You won't cause any difficulties for me. Every death is a tragedy, right? It should be. If a death is not a tragedy, then you know what you're saying? Life is a tragedy. And Baruch Hashem, he's moved on to a better place. He doesn't have to suffer anymore. You get older, there's pains, things are difficult, things are hard, And people wake up in the morning, so they pass away. They say, all right, listen, he was in pain, he was suffering, just as well. When a tzaddik dies, whose life was a work of art, as it says, tzaddikim are not affected by the eish of Gehenna because they're eish in this world. What does that mean, they're eish in this world? That means there could be air, and if it's blowing, it's wind. There could be water, and if it's moving, it's a wave. There's fire, and if fire isn't burning, it's called wood. It just exists in potential. Tzaddikim didn't exist in potential. They existed b'poyel. They were kinetic energy. They were moving in this world. They were accomplishing. So if you treat the death of a special person the same way you do as an ordinary person, then you're saying, I don't care how you live your life. Life's a curse. So a small child who dies, he was protected. He was saved from having to go through these many years of suffering. Yeah? And that's the tragedy. When a life goes by that was exceptional, and one of the things they used to say about Rabbi Gottesman, is that he looked for every kid. There was no such a thing as, we can't deal with this kid. I have to tell you, this was an exception. There are very few educators today who are like this, who say every Jewish kid deserves a Jewish education, regardless of if they have learning disabilities, if they misbehave, if there's a problem, When I was in Hank, there was this kid who was a real troublemaker. Everybody knew he was a troublemaker. Rabbi Gottesman told this story over to my parents. That's how I know the story. So one time, Rabbi Gottesman was using the bathroom facilities, and this kid was in the bathroom trying to sell a screwdriver to another kid. So the kid says, well, how do I know it's a good screwdriver? He says, here, I'll take the door off of the stall. And he starts unscrewing the stall. So the other kid says, there might be somebody in there. So he sticks his head under the door and he says, oh, hi, Rabbi Gottesman. Now, in some schools, that kid might not have continued. But to Rabbi Gottesman, it was a funny story. You know what I mean? I'm going to throw a kid out. And he used to say, you'd have fights with the board. I would have fight because I want to keep every kid. And there were kids who he held on to, who went on to live really special lives. Because somebody was able to look at them and be able to see beyond. So when somebody like Rabbi Gottesman passes away, to my mind, it requires us to stop and think. I was, kid from a Long Island, apathetic background, And he was also the tour director in Sdei Chemed. And he convinced my parents to take me to Sdei Chemed. Wow. What a culture shock. You know what I mean? I was with these kids who were like really intensely frum. My counselor was a Satmar Chassid, Used to wake us up in the morning. Raus, Yidden, raus, raus. I thought I was in one of those war movies. Raus, Yidden. Grab your things for lineup, And I got exposed to so many different things that I never would have seen and experienced. It was something that was so special. Yeah. Rav Shaya Cohen, he was the learning director, It was something I really got to see. I went for 2 years. I can tell you the fact that I've been living now in Eretz Yisrael for 30 years, I just celebrated the end of August, 30 years that I'm here, has something to do with the fact that Rabbi Gottesman brought me to Eretz Yisrael for 2 summers, gave me a chance to be able to appreciate Eretz Yisrael on a whole different level, in a way that I wouldn't have otherwise. So we have to look at a life, at a life that was meaningful, and a life that changed, a life that did things in this world, and it has to inspire us. Not to be ordinary, not to be like everybody else. Or somebody said to me, went to one of these things where they made speeches of Moshe Shapiro, and he told me, he says, it was shigrati. It's a Hebrew word that's like, it was ordinary. It was filling the gadol. You could say this about anybody. And Rav Moshe Shapiro was not like anybody else. And Rav Moshe Guardsman was not like anybody else. Yeah? When you say the last words on a Yaakov Avinu, on a David HaMelech, obviously, there was one David HaMelech, there was one Yaakov Avinu. But every single person, famous Reb Zusha, I'm not worried what am I going to do when HaKadosh Baruch Hu asks me why I wasn't Moshe Rabbeinu. I'll say because I wasn't on the level of Moshe Rabbeinu. I didn't have the koiches of Moshe Rabbeinu. But what am I going to do when he asks me why wasn't I Zusha? You don't have to be the best. You have to be the best you. Ma chovaso be'olamoi. What is your obligation in this world, says Mesilas Yesharim? Every person has to look at the reality that they're in and figure out how to make that their best world. So, those are some thoughts as we reach the end of Sefer Bereshis. And if you want to find out more about the Rabbi Orlofsky show, you can go to rabbiorlofsky.com/podcast. If you want to make a comment specifically on today's episode, you can go to rabbiorlofsky.com/podcast/11. If you want to know about any upcoming events that are scheduled, go to rabbiorlofsky.com/events. And if you would like to contact Rabbi Orlofsky, who is not beyond speaking of himself in the third person, he can be reached by rabbiorlofsky.com/contact. Have a beautiful Shabbos. Have a great week. And we'll see you next time.